The wind howled across the barren stretch of Nevada desert, sending coils of dust swirling like ghostly dancers over cracked earth. The sun was cruel and unrelenting, casting long shadows across the isolated research facility buried in the sand. From above, it looked like any other forgotten government structure, nondescript buildings, radio towers, and chain-link fences. But beneath the surface, beneath the concrete and wires and rusting steel, something else stirred. Something that had been sleeping, watching, listening. They called it Site B-23. It didn't officially exist on any federal blueprint. No civilian knew what it housed. Most of the scientists stationed there had been rotated out within months, burned out, paranoid, or quietly discharged. What remained was a skeleton crew, mostly young interns and contract workers with little knowledge of the project's origins. It was the kind of place where you didn't ask questions. You followed orders, filed reports, and pretended not to hear the scratching sounds in the walls.
The story begins with Natanale, 25, fresh out of grad school.
A geology intern with a mountain of debt and a thirst for adventure. When he got the invitation to join a classified government research program, he thought he'd struck gold. But Site B-23 was not the opportunity he had imagined. There were no cutting-edge labs or world-changing discoveries. Just silence, dust, and a single feature of interest, a large, circular cavity in the sub-basement that everyone referred to, simply, as the hole. It wasn't part of any known cave system. No seismic activity had created it. The cavity had seemingly appeared overnight during a routine drill survey 22 years ago. Since then, the hole had been kept under close observation but rarely discussed. Its depth was immeasurable. No echo. No bottom. Just darkness so pure it seemed to swallow light whole. Nathan was given minimal access to the files. No historical context, no mission statement. Just a list of sensors to monitor and samples to collect. Most days, he sat in a dim control room, watching grainy thermal footage of the pit. There was rarely movement.
No wildlife.
No wind. Just a steady, unnatural hum picked up by the low-frequency microphones, one that registered just barely outside the human ear's comfort range. It made Nathan's skull throb, like a migraine waiting to bloom. He first heard it on his 4th week. It was a Tuesday, nearing midnight. The others had gone home. Nathan, ever eager to prove himself, volunteered for the overnight watch. He sat in the control room sipping stale coffee, half asleep, when the monitors flickered. All the data feeds momentarily spiked, seismic sensors, thermal cams, pressure monitors, all screaming for attention.
Then silence. And then a voice.
At first, Nathan thought it was a glitch. Maybe one of the other interns playing a prank. But the sound wasn't coming from the speakers. It wasn't transmitted through any device. It was coming from inside the hole. And it wasn't just a voice. It was his name.
Enea, then.
Barely a whisper, yet it filled the entire sub-basement corridor. He froze.
The voice wasn't digital.
It wasn't mechanical. It sounded wet, organic, like lungs that hadn't tasted air in decades were forcing themselves to speak. He laughed nervously, shook his head, and chalked it up to lack of sleep. But when he replayed the audio logs, his stomach dropped. The frequency levels had shifted. Something deep in the pit had emitted sound, just once, just for a moment, but enough to confirm he wasn't hallucinating. He reported the anomaly to Dr. Voss, the senior researcher in charge. The old man had sunken eyes and a voice like crumpled paper, and he dismissed Nathan with a wave of his hand. The pit has pressure fluctuations all the time.
Geothermal resonance.
Nothing to worry about. But Nathan saw something in the old man's expression, something tight and guarded, like he did no more. Like this had happened before. Over the next few days, the voice returned. Never more than a few syllables. Always distorted. Sometimes it sounded like Nathan's own voice calling back at him. Other times it was deeper, alien, echoing in languages that twisted his thoughts. But it always began the same way. Nathan. Each time it happened, Nathan would review the tapes. But the recordings never captured it. The system glitched or the file corrupted.
No one else ever heard it.
He began losing sleep. His dreams were filled with visions of impossible depths, of endless tunnels twisting in geometries that defied physics. He saw faces in the dark, mouths open too wide, whispering secrets in ancient tongues. He'd wake up gasping, his ears ringing with echoes from below. Then came the blackouts. Nathan started losing time, hours vanishing from his memory. He'd find himself in parts of the facility he had no reason to be in, standing motionless, staring at blank walls or the reinforced doors to the pit chamber. He didn't remember getting there. Once, he woke up inside the elevator, descending alone to sublevel 6, where access was strictly restricted. The team began to notice his erratic behavior. He overheard whispers. Is he losing it? Maybe he's not cleared for this kind of work. But no one confronted him directly. Not even Dr. Voss. The man had become increasingly reclusive, locking himself in his office with old files and battered journals.
Nathan couldn't take it anymore.
One night, driven by a blend of fear and obsession, he decided to descend to the pit chamber alone. It was against protocol, but something compelled him, something that tugged at the back of his skull, whispering promises of truth.
Of revelation. Of understanding.
The hallway leading to the chamber was colder than he remembered.
Lights flickered above, casting long, twitching shadows.
The air smelled strange, like rust, ozone, and rotting fruit. As he approached the final door, he noticed something he'd never seen before, deep scratch marks along the steel, as if something had tried to claw its way out. The chamber was circular and lined with reinforced concrete. In the center, surrounded by a ring of flickering floodlights, was the hole, perfectly round, like it had been carved with impossible precision. No wind, no sound, just darkness that seemed to pulse and breathe.
Nathan stepped closer.
His breath caught in his throat. The humming returned, louder now, vibrating through his bones. He dropped to his knees, staring into the void. And then, it spoke again. But this time, it didn't whisper. It screamed.
A sound like 1,000 voices overlapping, shrieking in unison, filled the room.
Nathan clutched his ears, but the sound wasn't external. It was inside his head, crashing against the walls of his mind like a tidal wave.
Then, silence. Nathan blinked.
He was no longer in the chamber. He stood on the edge of a vast abyss, surrounded by black stone towers and pillars made of bone. The sky above was a swirling mass of red and violet, alive with shapes that defied description. Below him, the hole stretched wide and infinite, its mouth lined with teeth, its depths whispering truths that shattered sanity. He turned, and saw himself standing behind him. Same face, same eyes. But the other Nathan smiled. "You're not the first," it said.
"And you won't be the last."
Nathan jolted awake, lying on the floor of the pit chamber, nose bleeding, vision blurred.
The lights flickered overhead.
The door behind him had been sealed shut. On the monitors in the control room above, Dr. Voss stared in silence. He made no move to intervene, because the protocol had been followed. Anyone who heard the whole was never allowed to leave. The next morning, the cameras were turned off. No logs were saved. No incident was reported. Nathan Hale's file was quietly flagged, Observation Protocol Alpha. Dr. Voss signed the update with a shaking hand, then locked himself inside his office. Again. No one questioned the sudden change in Nathan's schedule. He no longer reported to the control room, nor joined the others for meals. He was moved to Sublevel 4, a sector unofficially reserved for high-risk personnel. Interns whispered about it like a myth. Those who had heard the whole were either discharged or reassigned, and no one really knew what that meant. Nathan remembered none of the transfer. He woke in a sterile room, white walls, a narrow bed, and no windows. For a moment, he thought he'd been moved to a medical bay. But there were no monitors, no staff. Just him, a dim fluorescent light overhead, and a camera embedded in the corner of the ceiling. Watching. His head throbbed with a low, relentless hum, like a distant drill burrowing into his skull. He pressed his palms into his temples, trying to will it away, but it only grew stronger when he closed his eyes. Worse, the whispers had returned. Not from the hole, not directly, but from the corners of the room, from the shadows beneath the furniture, from the silence itself. And the voices were familiar.
"Nathan."
This time it was his mother's voice.
"Nathan, don't go near the hole."
He opened his eyes. The room was still. The camera still watched. But the temperature had dropped. He could see his breath fogging the air. Something was wrong. He tried the door. Locked. He pounded his fists on the cold metal, shouting for someone, anyone, but no reply came. When he finally gave up, exhausted and sweating despite the cold, a small click echoed through the room. A tray slid through a compartment near the floor. Food. Dry. Flavorless. Sealed. The door remained shut.
On the third day, the voice spoke again.
Only this time, it wasn't outside him.
It came from within.
Nathan was staring at his reflection in the small steel mirror above the sink when it happened. For a second, the reflection blinked, but he hadn't. He froze.
The reflection leaned forward.
Its mouth moved, but the sound didn't come from the mirror. It came from deep in Nathan's own throat, bypassing his vocal cords, echoing in a voice layered with thousands of others. They buried us too deep, Nathan. They thought silence was safety. He stumbled back, knocking the chair over.
The mirror shattered on the floor, and the reflection vanished.
No alarms went off. No personnel rushed in. Nathan understood then, this room wasn't for his safety. It was for everyone else's. That night, the dreams worsened. He saw tunnels stretching into blackness, walls covered in wet, pulsing veins. In the center stood an altar made of glass and teeth. Figures gathered around it, dozens of them, faceless, shivering, whispering in unison. When he awoke, he found writing on the wall. Dozens of phrases, all written in his own handwriting, though he had no memory of doing it. The phrases were chillingly precise. They speak in frequencies we cannot name. The first man who listened never closed his eyes again. Stop looking into it. It is looking back. Dr. Voss made a deal. It's not a hole. It's a mouth. Nathan collapsed to his knees, gripping his hair, trying to silence the noise. But the hole was no longer just a distant voice. It had followed him. Inside him. Meanwhile, above ground, Dr. Voss was reviewing old audio logs, ones that had been scrubbed from the system years ago. He kept a secret hard drive hidden inside a false wall in his office, one labeled B-23 Incident Archive, Do Not Access. He listened again to the 2007 recording, the one that ended Project Iris and led to the first permanent sealing of the pit. It began with normal observation logs. Static. Geothermal updates. Then, a voice.
A woman's.
Cracking. Broken. We were wrong. It's not dormant. It was waiting. What followed was 4 minutes of screaming. Dozens of people, all at once, like a choir in hell.
The frequency shattered the microphones.
The footage afterward showed one of the research assistants, Dr. Marla Keene, staring into the hole with empty eyes, smiling as she stepped forward. Then she jumped. Her body was never found. No echo.
No splash.
Just swallowed. Dr. Voss shut off the recording and wiped his glasses, his hands trembling. He had tried to shut it down. For years, he filed reports warning of the auditory hallucinations, the pattern of mental breakdowns, the whole sickness, as some staff had begun to call it. But the funding increased. They kept sending new interns. Because the truth was never about geology. It was never about research. It was about containment. And now Nathan had heard it too.
The intercom buzzed.
A voice crackled through, security. Something had changed in sublevel 4. Subject hail. He's not responding. The camera feeds. Well, it's not right. Dr. Voss closed the secret panel and grabbed his keycard. He moved fast through the corridors, bypassing the elevator and taking the service stairs. He didn't need monitors to know what had happened. He had felt it, just like before. Inside Nathan's room, the lights were flickering, and the camera had been melted into the ceiling, metal dripping like wax. The walls were vibrating. Every surface was covered in symbols that glowed faintly in the dark, carved in languages that had never existed on Earth. Nathan stood in the center of the room, eyes white, mouth open in a silent scream. His feet hovered inches off the ground. When Voss stepped in, everything stopped. The lights died. The room fell silent. Nathan collapsed. His eyes blinked back into focus, but they were not the same. Not quite. He stared at Dr. Voss and whispered, Why didn't you warn us? The older man took a step forward. Because they would have silenced me too. Nathan's mouth twitched into a half-smile.
It's a wake now.
Voss paused. What is? Nathan looked toward the wall. His voice echoed like two people speaking at once.
Asterisco de one beneath. Asterisco. Trattino trattino.
In the days that followed, things at Site B-23 began to unravel. The temperature fluctuated wildly. Machines malfunctioned. Data logs erased themselves. Several staff members reported hearing voices, even though they'd never been near the pit. Then one of them went missing. Hannah Tse, a junior technician, failed to report for her shift. Security found her keycard near sublevel 6. The door to the pit chamber had been opened, against all access restrictions. The logs showed the lock disengaging at 3:06 a.m., but no one had clearance at that hour. And the worst part? The camera footage showed Hannah standing in the hallway outside the pit chamber for 7 hours. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, smiling, until the door opened and she walked inside. Her voice echoed over the lab intercom later that day. But the intercom hadn't been used. One voice becomes two. Two become four.
The silence is asterisco ending. Asterisco.
The staff panicked. Some resigned. Others requested transfer. Dr. Voss shut down the lower levels. Issued Level 4 containment. But it was too late. Nathan had already been changed. He no longer ate. He no longer slept. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then, it wasn't always his voice that answered.
Voss knew the signs.
He had seen it happen to others. The hole didn't kill its victims. It absorbed them, took their thoughts, their memories, their selves. And what was left was hollow.
Late one night, Dottore Voss sat alone in the control room, staring at the live feed from the pit chamber.
The hole pulsed faintly under the flickering lights.
Rose, low, deep, resonant.
And then, clear as day, it spoke. Voss, it's time you joined us. Dr. Voss hadn't slept in 3 days. He sat hunched over the console in the command center, the blue light of the monitors casting deep shadows beneath his eyes. Data scrolled endlessly across the screens, meaningless now, corrupted by symbols no human language could interpret. Seismic readings surged and dipped like a dying heartbeat. Every time the hole spoke, the system registered a brief, localized quake, as if the Earth itself was convulsing in reaction. But it wasn't just the data that disturbed him, it was the pattern. It had started with whispers, isolated voices, then full sentences. Now it was naming people. Every few hours, the name of another staff member echoed through the sublevels, projected not through the speakers, but through the infrastructure itself.
Pipes groaned with the sound.
Light fixtures buzzed syllables. Entire rooms vibrated with words. The lab was no longer just housing the anomaly. The lab was becoming part of it. The others were terrified. Dr. Yates from Biometric Analytics slit his wrists in the shower, leaving behind a journal filled with nonsensical phrases, each one repeated over and over, "The hole has roots. The hole has roots."
Asterisco asterisco.
Technician Para had to be restrained after she was found in the archives, scratching a hole into the concrete floor with her fingernails, muttering, "They live beneath us, but not below." And Nathan was no longer Nathan. He now sat cross-legged on the floor of his observation room, smiling at the walls, whispering into corners as if they whispered back. His eyes had taken on a strange hue, almost silver, and his veins glowed faintly under the skin, like moonlight through glass. Dr. Voss watched from behind the one-way mirror, his knuckles white around the edge of the clipboard he hadn't used in hours. "You're the bridge, aren't you?" Voss muttered under his breath.
"They cose you."
Nathan turned his head slowly toward the mirror, as if he'd heard the words through the walls, and smiled.
Trattino trattino.
The situation was beyond containment now. Site Command in Washington had been briefed. They responded with standard protocol, lockdown and isolation.
No external communication. Await instructions.
But no instructions came. The emergency lines fell silent.
Then the satellite uplink failed.
Then the power grid flickered, and the backup generators kicked on, even though no outage had occurred. Whatever this was, It wasn't limited to the pit anymore. It was spreading.
Trattino trattino.
3 days later, a drone was sent into the hole. It was not the first drone, but it was the first since the awakening. A 6-legged crawler equipped with LiDAR, sonar, and high-fidelity microphones was lowered down by steel cable, its camera streaming a live feed directly to the control room. The descent was slow, measured. At 500 meters, visibility dropped to 0.
No light penetrated the darkness below.
Then the temperature sensors stopped functioning. At 700 meters, the drone lost audio. No static. No error. Just nothing, as if sound could no longer exist at that depth. At 1,000 meters, something moved. A flicker of shape across the frame.
A ripple in the dark.
The sonar ping returned a shape that didn't make sense. Something massive, coiled, like a serpent of infinite length wrapped around itself. Then the video cut to black. Not static.
Black.
And the crawler's onboard speakers began broadcasting a voice, in Nathan's tone. You dig for answers, but you were never meant to find them. Then the cable began to rise, not pulled by the winch, but by something else. The team severed the tether. But by then, the entire sublevel was already humming.
Trattino trattino.
That night, alarms screamed throughout the base. The pit chamber doors had been opened. No one had authorized it. Security footage showed Nathan, alone, walking the corridor toward the sealed blast door. The time code indicated it was 3:06 a.m., the same time every incident had occurred in recent weeks. No keycard. No override. The door simply opened as he approached, as if the lock recognized him.
Nathan stepped inside.
Lights flared.
Sirens cut short. Then, silence. Complete and perfect silence.
Inside the chamber, he stood at the edge of the hole and whispered something unintelligible.
The lights flickered.
For 3 seconds, the camera feed caught a shape rising behind him. Tall, segmented, not quite solid.
Like smoke trapped in glass.
And then Nathan jumped. But the feed didn't show him falling. It showed him disappearing. The air folded, distorted like heat waves.
And then, nothing.
No body. No trace. Only the voice remained. The veil is thinning.
Trattino trattino.
After Nathan's disappearance, containment efforts collapsed entirely. Sublevel 3 flooded with black fluid that didn't register as any known element. It smelled like scorched metal and decaying flowers. Lights shattered on contact with it. Personnel began vanishing without a trace. Security found only piles of clothing, radios still broadcasting soft static, and sometimes faint laughter buried inside the noise. Voss knew what had to be done.
Asterisco asterisco echo protocol. Asterisco asterisco.
It had been drafted 20 years ago, after the initial discovery of the pit.
A worst case scenario directive. A death sentence.
If the entity inside the hole ever began to spread beyond its chamber, beyond containment, the entire site was to be collapsed and buried under 30 meters of concrete, with thermal charges rigged to liquefy the lower levels. It was a last resort. And now it was the only option left. Voss activated the command sequence from the terminal in his office. His fingers trembled. The system asked for a final voice confirmation. Are you sure you want to initiate echo? He paused, stared at the monitor, thought of Nathan.
Of Marlachene.
Of all the names the hole had called. Then he leaned forward and spoke clearly. Yes. The countdown began. T-minus 24 hours.
Trattino trattino.
But the hole had other plans.
Ati 3:06 di notte. The system crashed. The countdown froze.
All digital interfaces began bleeding symbols, black lines and foreign alphabets that squirmed like worms on the screen. The lights in the facility dimmed, then turned red, not alarm red.
Asterisco deep asterisco red.
Organic. Pulsing. And then Nathan's voice returned. But this time, it echoed from every wall. We are awake. You cannot bury what does not die. Security attempted to reach the blast core to reset the manual detonation sequence, but every stairwell was gone. Replaced by corridors that shouldn't exist, spiraling halls that looped back into themselves. Like the building was rewriting its shape. Dr. Voss wandered for hours, unsure if he was in the lab or inside a dream. Every time he turned a corner, he saw something from his past, his childhood bedroom, his father's hospital bed, the face of Marla Keene staring at him from inside a glass wall. He stopped running, because he realized the truth. They were no longer in the lab. They were inside the hole. It had swallowed Site B-23 entirely.
Trattino.
In the final hours, Voss found himself standing in front of the observation mirror again. Only this time, Nathan stood on the other side.
Alive.
Or something like it. His body shimmered faintly, as if only mostly real. His eyes were hollow. Not black, but full of stars. He smiled and pressed his hand against the glass. "You tried to silence it," Nathan whispered. "But it waited. Patiently."
It learned from you. Voss stepped closer.
"What do you want?" he asked, voice barely a breath. Nathan tilted his head.
We don't want.
We are. Wanting is for those who lack. We are becoming. The mirror shattered, not outward, but inward, sucked into a void that screamed without sound. Voss fell to his knees. And as the world around him cracked and twisted into something older, the voice filled his ears once more. The hole was never just a hole. It was a wound.
And now, it bleeds.
There was no longer a Site B-23. Not in any conventional sense. The ground where the facility had stood was still there, but it had warped, buckled, and split like torn flesh. Satellite imaging showed an expanding depression in the earth, as though something vast and ancient had turned beneath the desert crust. Where there had once been concrete and steel, now there was only ruin, scorched sand, twisted metal, and long black spires rising slowly from the ground like petrified roots. The government scrubbed it from all maps. No flyovers were allowed. No recovery teams were dispatched. And no one, not a single voice, emerged from the crater. As far as the outside world was concerned, Site B-23 had never existed. But within the crater, something else had taken root. And it was growing.
Trattino.
Dr. Voss should have died. He had triggered the Echo Protocol. He had sealed the doors. He had watched the facility collapse inward, reality warping like a dying star pulling matter into itself. But somehow, he still breathed. Somehow, he still was. He wandered through halls that no longer belonged to Earth. The walls were made of something that resembled flesh more than metal. They pulsed gently, as if mimicking a heartbeat. The light came from no visible source, casting everything in a perpetual twilight, neither day nor night, neither dream nor waking. Time had unraveled. He no longer felt hunger, no longer thirst. Sleep was unnecessary. There was only awareness, constant and gnawing. He wasn't alone. There were others, but they weren't people anymore. Figures drifted through the hallways, silent and shrouded, as though formed from smoke and bone. Some had faces. Others did not. Some wept as they moved, their sobs echoing through walls that absorbed the sound like old sponges. Others whispered prayers to gods that had no names.
Most said nothing.
Voss avoided them when he could. But one figure always returned.
Nathan.
He appeared intermittently, always at a distance, sometimes upside down on the ceiling, sometimes staring from behind a transparent wall that didn't exist moments before. His smile remained unchanged. Gentle. Knowing. Wrong. And every time he spoke, his voice was layered with countless others. Some Voss recognized from his old team. Others were alien, twisted beyond human articulation. "You are where you've always been, Doctor," Nathan said one day, walking beside him without footsteps. "You were part of the wound. You just didn't know it." Voss didn't respond. Not at first. But something inside him had shifted. The resistance was fading. The hum, the low, aching frequency of the hole, had become comforting.
Familiar.
Like the ticking of a clock he'd lived beside his whole life. "What is this place?" Voss asked at last. Nathan turned to him. His form flickered slightly, as if not fully resolved. "It's not a place. It's what's always been beneath the places."
Beneath understanding. Beneath you.
Voss wanted to scream. But he no longer remembered how.
Trattino.
Outside the crater, the world remained oblivious. But then, the dreams began. First in Nevada towns closest to the site. then in nearby states. By the end of the second month, people across the country, across the world, reported shared nightmares. Forums filled with panic. Reddit exploded with threads. Anyone else dream of the spiral pit?
I keep waking up to the sound of something breathing under my house.
The voice said it knows my name. It said it's coming through me. The CDC called it a mass psychogenic illness.
A wave of hysteria.
Social contagion amplified by online exposure. But some researchers privately noted strange correlations in brain activity across affected individuals. All showed increased frontal lobe activity during sleep. All displayed temporary auditory hallucinations. All heard the same phrase whispered in a language they didn't understand, but somehow recognized. And then, people began to disappear.
Not all at once.
Not dramatically. One by one, in quiet, overlooked moments. A child vanished from his locked bedroom in Utah. A nurse walked into a hospital storage closet in Kentucky and never came out. A couple hiking near the Arizona border was found days later, blank-eyed, catatonic, whispering coordinates in the desert. Coordinates that pointed to the ruins of Site B-23. And there, something had begun to emerge.
Trattino.
Beneath the crater, Voss was beginning to see. He stood at the edge of what was once the pit chamber. Now, it was a chasm that stretched across forever, an abyss whose edges moved when he blinked. Shapes floated within, massive and slow, like whales beneath black ice. They had no eyes, no mouths, but they watched, and they spoke. Not in words, but in impressions, waves of understanding that struck his mind like deep ocean pressure. He dropped to his knees, clutching his skull as images flooded in.
***, a tower of glass in a desert of blood.
A choir of teeth singing in reverse. A child with no skin walking backward into a wall. A hand with too many fingers, reaching up from the earth. ***. He screamed.
And the void screamed back. Trattino.
Nathan stood behind him again. No longer flickering. No longer smiling. He now resembled something taller, elongated.
His limbs bent wrong.
His skin no longer held form. You asked what it wanted, he said, voice echoing from every direction.
Voss clutched the floor, eyes shut tight. What is it?
Nathan knelt beside him. It is the memory of silence, the absence of form, the shadow of thought before the first word was spoken. It is not from here, but it is what made here. A pause. Then, with dreadful finality. And it has decided to return.
Trattino.
In the world above, the phenomena escalated. Animals began acting strangely. Birds flew in spirals until they dropped dead from exhaustion. Dogs barked at empty corners for hours. Whales stranded themselves by the hundreds, their songs warped into indecipherable frequencies. Astronomers recorded distortions in deep space radio signals, subtle fluctuations that matched the pulse rhythm of the crater's seismic activity. A small observatory in Finland picked up a narrowband signal unlike anything ever seen before. A looped phrase.
Over and over again.
In English, translated and filtered by AI analysis.
We hear you.
We see you.
We come through. Trattino.
Governments could no longer ignore it. The area around Site B-23 was quarantined, declared radioactive, sealed by military force.
Drones patrolled the skies.
But no matter how far they pushed the perimeter, strange incidents continued. One morning, every digital clock within a 50-mile radius reset to 3:06 a.m. and stayed there. Phones wouldn't reboot. Watches froze. The world refused to move forward.
And the whispering grew louder. In children.
In elderly.
In sleepwalkers.
Something was using people now. As vessels.
As doors. Trattino.
Underground, Voss was brought to the center. No longer walking, he floated, guided by forces he couldn't see. Around him were the remnants of other facilities, other structures, crushed and consumed. Places he had never known existed. There were others floating near him. Figures in old lab coats. Miners. Soldiers. Scientists. All silent.
All empty-eyed.
In the center of the chasm stood a column, glass-like and pulsing with internal light. Inside it swirled a shape that couldn't be described, only sensed. Every time Voss tried to comprehend it, he forgot parts of himself, his name, his purpose, his self.
Nathan's voice filled the space once more.
We were the first to see, but not the last. They've opened before, and will open again. But this time, the veil will not close. Voss wept, not from fear, but from understanding. The hole was never about what lay beneath. It was about what lies behind.
Beyond reality. Beyond perception.
And now, it was no longer behind. It was here.
Everything inside me screamed to run.
But where? The hallway we'd come through had collapsed during the last tremor. The reinforced ceiling, once a symbol of security, now hung in jagged slabs over our heads. Beyond the gaping cracks in the walls, I could hear it, the voice from the hole, no longer whispering, but speaking in bold, impossible syllables that hummed beneath my skin like radio static and rotting breath. Dr. Reed stood by the breach, arms trembling, her face pale and soaked in sweat. Behind her, the containment glass to sublevel B cracked slowly, as though something behind it was testing the strength. She turned to me, her voice dry and sharp. It's awake. We breached something ancient, something that speaks with more than words. I helped her back from the cracking glass just as another tremor hit. The lights flickered again, this time dying completely for a long, terrible minute.
Darkness fell like a lid.
I felt the pressure shift in the air, the kind of pressure you only feel deep underwater or in a plane losing altitude. My ears popped. A humming started to build in the base of my skull, and I swore I heard my mother's voice whispering my name from inside my own mind. When the lights flickered back, we both gasped. Something had moved into the lab during the blackout. The air was wrong, denser, like breathing in fog made of ash.
Dust swirled where nothing stirred.
Shadows lengthened unnaturally toward the central pit. The hole was no longer a smooth cylinder. Its edges were jagged now, pulsing slowly.
Alive.
Like the throat of some buried god breathing through rock and metal. And it was still speaking. But now, it wasn't using human language. It wasn't even a sound. It was thought, projected directly into us. Fragmented images.
Burning cities. Screaming skies. A cracked moon-dripping black ichor.
Symbols older than time. And beneath it all, a deep, cosmic hunger that had no mouth but could devour entire worlds. Reeds clutched her head and dropped to her knees. I tried to pull her up, but her eyes were rolled back, lips murmuring ancient syllables I couldn't recognize.
Latin. Sumerian. Something older.
She was repeating something over and over, voice rising in pitch. It was sealed for a reason. It was sealed for a reason. I dragged her toward the emergency lift shaft. The elevator was dead, of course, but the manual ladder beside it remained. Above us, the rungs vanished into shadow. We didn't have a choice. As I started climbing with Reeds behind me, the building groaned. From below, I heard the containment glass shatter. That low rumble began again, not mechanical, not geological, organic, hungry. Something big was moving through the substructure. Halfway up the shaft, Reeds looked down. Her scream echoed up the ladder. Below us, black tendrils were slithering out of the hole, arms made of shadow, rippling through the metal and stone like it wasn't even there. And they were fast. We scrambled upward, hearts thundering. Metal groaned beneath us as the tendrils reached for the ladder, twisting and coiling like vipers. One brushed my ankle. It was cold, not in the way ice is cold, but in the way emptiness is cold.
Like falling through space.
My leg seized. I almost slipped.
Reeds pulled me back up just in time.
Together, we hauled ourselves to the emergency access panel leading into the upper corridors of the lab. I slammed the manual release and the hatch burst open.
Warm, sterile air hit my face.
A horrible contrast to the unnatural breath that seeped up from below. We tumbled through, sealing the hatch behind us. For a moment, I thought it might hold. Then the metal began to warp. Bubbles formed on its surface like something was boiling it from inside.
The black tendrils pressed against the seal.
They're not tendrils, Reeds muttered. They're feelers. It's exploring. We ran. The upper levels of the lab had fallen into chaos. Security personnel were dead, not torn apart, but hollowed faces frozen in horror, eyes scorched out like they'd seen something they couldn't process. Screens blinked nonsense, cascades of ancient symbols scrolling across every surface. Alarms blared, not just from the lab system but from radios, phones, even the emergency broadcast speakers overhead. One static message kept repeating. Evacuate immediately.
Breach Protocol Code Black. Iniziate Final Lockdown. Asterisco asterisco.
Then, in a different voice, my voice, recorded somehow and played back in warped distortion. Asterisk, it's not a hole. It's a throat. And it's hungry.
Asterisco.
I froze. Reed stared at me in shock.
How the hell did it get your voice?
I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was remembering something I had buried, the night I first saw the hole. Back during orientation, I'd wandered off into a restricted section. The security gate had been left open. Curious, I'd stepped into sublevel C, where the original breach had occurred years ago. The walls had been scorched.
The metal warped.
At the center was the original fissure, now sealed with meters of steel and concrete. I remember hearing something back then. A hum.
A whisper. And then uno forgot.
Until now. I had heard the voice before. I had listened. And worse, I had answered. The pressure in my skull increased as a new voice invaded. Not from below now, but within me. It was my voice, but deeper, hollowed out. It laughed and said, Asterisk, you opened the door. You were always meant to.
Asterisco.
The lab's main exit was just ahead. The reinforced blast door, our final way out. Locked. Reeds frantically typed into the override terminal. Access denied, it said over and over.
Red light batted the corridor.
I tried to break the glass panel with a fire extinguisher. Nothing. Then the lights cut out again. Darkness swallowed us. I heard movement. Then a sound like breathing, but all around us, coming through vents, pipes, even the walls. The structure itself was inhaling. The ground vibrated. And then...
A voice, right behind me. Not the monster. Not the thing. Asterisco asterisco Dottore Maer. Asterisco asterisco. The head of the lab.
She was dead. I'd seen her body. Her voice was raspy, lips moving with a sluggishness that wasn't human. She stepped into the red emergency light, half her face melted, eyes glowing with a dull purple hue. You shouldn't have come back here, she rasped. I backed away.
What asterisco is asterisco it?
What did we wake up? Mar smiled with too many teeth. It was never asleep. It was waiting. The lab just called it a hole.
A curiosity.
But it's a vein, one of many.
A crack in the crust of reality.
And it bleeds. She lifted her hand and pointed to the door. It wants you to see it. All of it. Reed screamed, clutching her ears. I turned just in time to see the wall behind her split open, not from physical force, but like reality itself peeled apart, revealing a swirling darkness beyond. Something massive slithered through, hundreds of eyes opening like stars in a black sky. I grabbed Reed's, yanked her back before the eyes saw her. We had seconds. I can override the door, she gasped. But we have to get to the admin terminal on sublevel A.
Another level down.
Toward the breach. No choice. We ran for the emergency stairs, trying not to look at the walls that pulsed and shifted as if alive. Trying not to listen to the chorus of voices rising from the vents, all calling our names. When we reached the admin terminal, everything changed. It was working. The override accepted Reed's credentials. The door above would open in 10 seconds. But then, asterisk, the screen went black. Asterisk. New text appeared. In my voice.
Asterisco asterisco you let it in. Now let it through. Asterisco asterisco.
A countdown began. 10.
9. 8. Asterisco asterisco.
Something was coming up the stairs. Something enormous. Something dragging memory, flesh, and reality in its wake. I looked at Reed's. We opened that door. We let it out. She shook her head.
We stay. We di.
I turned to the console, heart hammering.
Asterisco asterisco 5. 4. 3. Asterisco asterisco.
And then, I made a choice. The silence that followed was thicker than any darkness they'd faced. Dr. Lynn Havers stood motionless at the rim of the pit. The laboratory had descended into chaos after the last transmission. Jordan's final scream was still echoing in her skull, not from memory, but from the hole itself. The sound of his death hadn't faded. It looped faintly, somewhere beneath her feet. Like the pit was replaying it, savoring it. The lights in the lab now flickered at inconsistent intervals. The emergency generators had kicked in, but their low, buzzing hum didn't feel like a comfort. It was the sound of dying systems gasping for breath. Cables dangled like torn arteries from the ceiling. Glass crunched beneath her boots. Blood smeared the hallway floors. And the hole never stopped murmuring. Sometimes it spoke in her voice. Sometimes it asked her to jump. And sometimes, worse, it told her what would happen if she didn't. She stumbled back toward the main console, using a flickering tablet to scan what was left of the pit's telemetry. The hole had widened overnight, unnaturally so, consuming not just physical matter but digital space. The lab's internal servers were infected. Every recorded soundbite now carried embedded voices that weren't part of the original recordings. Scientists' logs played back with distorted laughter. Footsteps layered over interviews.
Screams underlined under silence.
It was rewriting everything it touched. They dug into a void, but this wasn't just geological. This was something else.
Something outside the natural order.
Something ancient and aware. Lynn activated the last remaining drone and sent it over the hole. Its camera feed was clear at first, just an endless vertical shaft, but then static overtook the screen. When it returned a few moments later, the drone was hundreds of meters deeper than any previous recording. And the feed had changed.
It wasn't darkness anymore.
It was a face. It filled the entire screen. Rough, featureless, pulsating like a dying star, but with eye sockets that were too deep and too knowing. It was watching the drone. Watching her through it. The drone spun wildly and then...
Asterisco asterisco, hello again. Asterisco asterisco.
The voice didn't come from the speaker. It came from behind her.
Lynn spun around.
No one was there.
De ole laughed. Trattino trattino.
By 3:12 a.m., she was the only one left alive in the main sector. Security footage showed the rest of the team fleeing into Sublevel 6, which collapsed moments after they entered.
A scream echoed across every intercom before the power failed again.
After that, it was just her.
And the voice.
Asterisk, you opened the door, asterisk, it said, calmly, sweetly.
Asterisco, now commence what lives beyond it, asterisco.
But Lynn wasn't ready to give in. She barricaded herself in the server room, surrounded by humming machines still untouched by the corruption. She began transmitting data externally, video files, logs, everything. She sent messages to news outlets, to government servers, even to her own personal cloud. Anything to get the truth out. But every time she sent a file, the voice would speak afterward. Asterisk deleted, asterisk, and the file would vanish. Asterisk, you cannot warn them, asterisk, it said. Asterisk, because they already hear me, asterisk.
Trattino trattino.
Then came the breach. The walls began to bleed. Not metaphorically, asterisk literally star. A dark, viscous fluid seeped from cracks in the concrete. Instruments shorted out as red-black veins pulsed across the lab surfaces, creeping like roots toward anything electronic. The pit was no longer a passive anomaly. It was a living organism, or worse, a gateway. From somewhere far below, she heard footsteps. Not one set. Not human. Hundreds of dragging limbs.
Clicking sounds. Claws tapping on stone.
She realized it then. The hole hadn't been expanding. It had been giving birth. And now, the things it had gestated were climbing up. She grabbed what equipment she could, an emergency flare gun, 2 oxygen tanks, a sealed data drive, and fled toward the upper decks. As she sprinted, lights exploded behind her. Sirens returned, distorted and garbled, playing garish nursery rhymes instead of warnings. Ring Around the Rosie echoed from every speaker. The overhead signage changed.
Asterisco asterisco, do not look into the hole. Asterisco asterisco. Asterisco asterisco, it sees you. Asterisco asterisco.
It remembers your name. When she reached the elevator, she slammed the emergency override.
The lift groaned to life, rising slowly.
Too slowly. Then, just before the doors closed, a long-fingered hand reached in. It wasn't flesh. It was bone wrapped in something darker, like obsidian melted over cartilage. She fired the flare directly into the doorway. The thing screamed, a hollow metallic sound that hurt to hear, and recoiled.
The doors shut. The elevator rose.
But she knew it wouldn't stop them for long.
Trattino trattino.
She emerged on the surface into pale morning light. The desert looked normal. Too normal.
The sky was clear. Birds chirped.
Wind blew gently across the sand. And no one was there.
No security. No emergency responders.
No helicopters. No vehicles. Not even tire tracks. She activated her satellite phone. No signal. The world had moved on without them, or been cut off. The lab behind her groaned, steel warping as if something massive shifted beneath the ground. The entrance collapsed in a controlled demolition, automated protocol. But she hadn't triggered it. The pit had. It was sealing itself, burying its own evidence. But she still had the data drive. She ran 4 miles across the flat desert, through heat waves and illusions. She didn't stop until she reached the abandoned relay tower used during their setup phase. There, she uploaded the contents of the drive to an isolated system, then to a satellite feed. She didn't know who would get it. She just knew someone had to. Then she collapsed.
Trattino trattino.
She woke up in a hospital 2 days later. Military personnel surrounded her. They asked questions. Repeatedly. In circles. About the lab. About the hole. About the voices. She answered what she could, but every time she mentioned what she saw, what she heard, the lights would flicker. One of the soldiers would twitch. Another would stare blankly for several minutes. Their mouths would move like they were chewing something that wasn't there. They released her. Told her there'd been a gas leak.
No mention of the lab.
Or the deaths. Or the pit. But on the day she returned home, she found something waiting on her kitchen counter.
A smooth black stone, shaped like the edge of a circle.
And underneath it, a note written in her own handwriting. We are still speaking.
Asterisco asterisco. Trattino trattino. Asterisco asterisco. Conclusion asterisco asterisco.
If you're watching this, it means someone received the files. It means the upload worked. But listen closely, don't go looking for the lab. Don't try to find the pit.
Don't investigate.
Because the hole doesn't need to be found.
Asterisco asterisco it finds asterisco you asterisco punto asterisco asterisco. When you close your eyes tonight, and the darkness presses in.
Listen.
If you hear something whisper your name from beneath your bed, from the corner of your room, from inside your mind. It's not a dream. It's the Ole.
And now that you've heard it, it knows you too. Sleep tight.